Welcome to the Pea PodCast, your weekly dose of clarity in a world overflowing with health headlines. I'm your host, Alicia Simpson. Everywhere we look, there's a new must-do for our health, and don't you dare warning or a miracle cure trending online. It's easy to feel overwhelmed, confused, and sometimes just plain frustrated trying to figure out what's genuinely good for you. That's where we come in. On the Pea Podcast, we roll up our sleeves and dive deep into those headlines. We're here to help you separate the scientific fact from the wellness fiction, breaking down complex topics into easy-to-understand, digestible insights. No fads, no fear-mongering, just practical, evidence-based information designed to empower you. Whether you're a health enthusiast seeking deeper understanding or simply trying to make sense of the latest health news for yourself and your family, you're in the right place. We're committed to helping you navigate the noise and make truly informed choices that nourish your body and mind. So settle in, take a deep breath, and let's explore the world of wellness together, one topic at a time. All right, friends, let's talk about something that many of us have encountered at a doctor's visit, seen on a health chart, or perhaps even attempted to calculate yourself: the body mass index, or BMI. For decades, it's been the go-to metric, a simple number that supposedly tells us if we're at a healthy weight. But in recent years, there's been a growing conversation and even some controversy around its true utility. Is it a reliable indicator of health? Or, as our episode title asks, is BMI bogus? Today, we're absolutely thrilled to welcome a fantastic guest who is coming to us to help dissect this very question. She's a wealth of knowledge, a registered dietitian, a certified diabetes care and education specialist, and so much more. Please give a warm welcome to Ashleigh Spitza. Hey, Ashleigh, how are you today?
Hi, Alicia. I'm doing pretty well. How are you?
Fantastic. I am so excited to jump into this discussion on BMI. It tends to be a controversial topic. I know I've spoken about BMI at conferences before, and the question that always comes up is BMI bogus? Should we even be looking at BMI? And so I think you're the perfect person to talk about this
Well,
today.
thank you. I appreciate that. And I do agree. I think it is a hot topic, and there's many a t-shirt and sticker dedicated to calling out the BMI as bogus or another not so nice word. So yes, I'm ready to get into it.
I love that, and
Yeah.
not so nice words. All right, well, to start, can you just give us a brief history of BMI and its original purpose? It seems it wasn't always intended as the health indicator we use it as today.
That is right. So yeah, just kind of kicking it off with like the most basic basics is BMI, or body mass index, is really just your weight in kilograms over your height in meters squared. Some people don't even know that. Like, where does this number come from? But where does it come from even further back? It was developed by a scientist slash statistics-ish person named Adolphe Quetelet. And he developed this equation in the early 1800s. And he used a lot of data, but the data was extremely homogeneous. It was pulled exclusively from white men, and it was really intended when he created it to be used like a population level tool. His pursuit was to describe the, quote, average man, and to be able to kind of predict the size and the shape of a population. So despite his explicit warning when he created it against using it individually, the BMI has become a key criterion for accessing certain medical care in healthcare systems here in the US and also globally. So around the 1940s, this life insurance company, the Metropolitan Life Insurance Company, developed ideal weight tables so that they could try to predict their policyholders' longevity. And then the next kind of key point in history was when pretty famous scientist, physiologist Ansel Keys, he popularized this term BMI as we know it today based on Quetelet's calculation. And he really was wanting to use it as like a superior measure of what relative body weight. And he took a little bit more of a diverse sample, but it was still all men, middle-aged men, American, European, Japanese, and Black South African men. And he said, yeah, this measure is not great, but it's the best we've got. It correctly identifies quote unquote obesity about half the time. So it's 50% accurate. But nonetheless, the National Institutes of Health were like, oh, let's run with it. So in 1973, they developed the current BMI tables that we use today. And they started to define people that were overweight based on them being in the top 15% of the population, which at the time was a BMI of 27.8 for men and 27.3 for women. And then they had another category called severe overweight, which was the top 5% of the population. So that was kind of where it all began to get used in healthcare, but they actually decided to revise it in 1985. And they took away the use of skin fold thickness to diagnose obesity, and instead, they just started using the BMI alone. And in 1995, the WHO kind of crowned the BMI as the global standard for classifying overweight and obesity. And from there, it kind of got really messy and really yucky because pharmaceutical companies got involved and they had a couple of weight loss medications in development that they were just about to release. And so they sort of lobbied this International Obesity Task Force to essentially lower the threshold for what would be considered overweight down to 25 as it is today. So people who had previously been considered normal weight overnight became overweight. And then from there, the next key point was 1995, we started to see BMI being used in pediatric populations, which is, still today generating some debate.
Yeah.
But certainly, it was a lot of concern regarding applying this to a population, children who are growing and changing so rapidly. And then kind of the last point I like to say in our historical timeline here of the BMI is not so far from today, which was in 2023, the AMA, the American Medical Association, released their kind of I wouldn't say it was a strong statement, but it was a statement acknowledging that BMI, especially when it's used by itself, is an imperfect clinical measure, that the current system we use to classify people based on BMI can be misleading. It can also overstate the fact that body mass impacts mortality. And so they wanted to really encourage physicians and healthcare providers to start looking at comorbidities, lifestyle, gender, ethnicity, genetics, how long people were in certain BMI categories, and all sorts of different factors rather than just using the BMI to sort of diagnose and treat. So yeah, that's where we got from the 1800s to today, talking about BMI and its imperfect nature.
Oh my gosh. And like so many things, the person who started it all did not intend for any of this to happen. This is the unintended consequences of this discovery.
Yep.
So,
You're right about that.
gosh, and just thinking about being used in kids is difficult. I think you and I both work with children in the dietetic setting, and to think of something that would really not apply to either one of us because neither of us are white men.
Right.
So it's really hard to judge me against a white man when I'm a 5'7" Black female. So,
You got it.
Yes, but with that, thinking about some of those limitations, outside of the fact that we're not both white men or South African men or any of the men who were counted as part of this research. And it doesn't really take into account like muscle mass, bone density, fat distribution. What do you see as some of the bigger limitations of the BMI?
Where to start? No. First, I think it's important to kind of, I just like to kind of say right off the bat as we get into this, it's important to establish like clearly and confidently that lower weight and lower BMI does not always indicate like a superior body composition or better health, right? One thing about the BMI is that it's highly specific, but its sensitivity is really poor. It's about 50% sensitive to kind of diagnosing or finding people with obesity. So what that means is like if we assume conventionally, like healthcare does, that people with a higher BMI are quote unquote unhealthy and people with a normal BMI are healthy, then the test of BMI would correctly identify people without a weight-associated health risk like diabetes, but it would incorrectly identify a lot of people with a weight-associated health risk at a much greater rate than they actually have it. So essentially, what I'm trying to say in not so many words is that the BMI might say, this person is unhealthy because they are at this level. That is going to be wrong a lot of the time. But on the
Mm.
other flip side of it, it's going to say this person is healthy because their BMI is in the quote unquote normal range, might be a little bit more accurate, but that doesn't make it a super useful tool.
Yes, yes. I know we've probably both seen people who are fitting within that healthy range on the BMI, but have heart disease or kidney disease or, name the disease, they
Absolutely.
have it. And then people with a larger BMI, a higher BMI, who have none of
Totally.
those things. Uh, and you mentioned what got me when you were mentioning that BMI is now being used in pediatrics. Because I remember back in my day, in the early dinosaur days when I became a dietitian, uh, it was always talked about that we never use BMI with children. We use Z scores. We use like this very specific statistical analysis. And now I see more and more it being used. And my biggest thought is the height and weight. Like children do not grow perfectly, along this linear line. They're gaining weight and then gaining no weight and then getting really tall and kind of goes back and
Absolutely.
forth. Uh, the fact that BMI relies so heavily on height and weight, just this calculation, um, that seems like it can create a lot of potential inaccuracies, especially in different populations, looking at like athletes, older adults, various ethnicities. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's one thing that even more mainstream medical institutions have started to be a little bit more transparent about, is that it's really not accurate for certain groups. So the BMI, like we talked about, it was cooked up using data from a really homogeneous group of individuals. And so it's not going to be super accurate when we try to apply it to everyone else. Lots of different kinds of people just weren't part of the original study. So like you mentioned, athletes, especially the really strong athletes, right? Like super muscular athletes, they can have a very high BMI. They've got a lot of muscle on their body. Oftentimes their body fat is low. So we've got that classic example that people like to use to kind of rip on the BMI, like Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, right? He's obese according to the BMI. He's clearly not obese in terms of his body fat percentage, right? But it's an interesting
Yeah.
point, right? Because it's interesting. It's kind of a fun example, but it's honestly not my favorite because athletes just usually don't face the same kind of like weight bias that folks with bigger bodies do face.
Mhm.
And so it's kind of like a cop out to me. It's like, well, yeah, that's not really the main problem with BMI is that The Rock is being classified wrong. It's that people who live in larger bodies are being stigmatized because they're being labeled this way. But to your point, we've got older adults, right? Older adults, people, humans tend to have more body fat as they age. And so most people going to be losing some muscle mass as well as they get older. So even if their weight and their BMI go down a little bit, they might still have a similar or even a higher amount of body fat. And what's really interesting that for older adults, especially for women after menopause, research actually suggests that a BMI that would be considered overweight or even in the obese category in younger people might actually be linked to like better survival and overall mortality and better health in the older populations. And it's definitely protective against things like frailty and getting sick as often. So yeah, another piece, as you mentioned, is like people with different ethnicities or races, right? That can affect how we store fat. That's not necessarily true across the board for everyone from a certain ethnic group, but there can be patterns, right? So like when it comes to race, the current BMI cutoffs that we have are more likely to incorrectly label Black folks as having obesity, whereas they might naturally have less body fat and more muscle, let's say, compared to white folks with the same BMI. And then you have on the flip side, Asian people. And this is a huge diverse group, obviously, that is often thrown out as like Asian people. The risk for things like metabolic issues and heart disease can show up at lower BMI. So they might get missed if we use the standard cutoffs. So, and even things like you've probably heard about how where we carry our fat can really impact the danger of that fat, so to speak. So, like kind of that subcutaneous fat versus the fat around our organs. That can also vary between people of different racial groups. So it's really, again, kind of just not doing a great service to folks just to use the BMI to kind of say, hey, this is where we think you fall.
Absolutely. And I hadn't even really thought about that with people with smaller bodies who are also being missed in the screening process. We often think about the bias of BMI towards larger body
Yes.
individuals, but we were missing an entire population of people just by saying,
Yes.
oh, you look
Yes.
great.
Exactly.
You're healthy. It says 22, you're healthy.
Yeah. We
No,
won't
no
do any
further
screening. We
questions.
won't ask you
So,
about your family history or your lifestyle because our number says you're good.
yeah, yeah. And speaking of that, BMI is often used as that screening tool. So that's the way that we decide, what the next level of
Hmm.
testing should be. And I often have patients in larger bodies who say they go in and they're going to the same physician as their friends, but they have a different body size, and all of a sudden they're getting a battery of tests. They're off with a cardiologist, and their friend wasn't sent to the cardiologist, even though their blood pressure was great. Everything came back looking good. So what do you think that they mean, or in your research, what do they mean as the BMI as a screening tool? Like, what does that
Yeah.
actually
So, I
mean?
mean, when we look at BMI at its most basic, right, it's really just a number that can be one piece of like a massive puzzle that we're trying to figure out when we're trying to decide if someone's at risk for a health issue. And like we talked about, relying on BMI by itself, it can really miss the mark. It can overlook people who are actually at risk. On the flip side, it can flag perfectly healthy individuals. And we know it's because the BMI was really designed and it still works its best as a tool to look at trends across groups of people. We do see, that data shows on a population level, higher BMIs can correlate with poorer health. And I think that when physicians, insurance companies, the people who are writing the rules, so to speak, decide people at this BMI level should have these tests, they're relying more on that population data than looking at the individual's risk factors. And so they're saying, well, we don't want to give this test to everyone. That would be too expensive. So we're just going to look at this group who correlationally is more likely to have this issue, notwithstanding any other, history, lifestyle, or other things that we would look at if we were really trying to get a full, clear picture of someone's health or health risks.
I'm hearing insurance brought up a lot in this conversation, more than
Yeah.
anticipated. And it sounds like, even it being used as a tool was all about insurance and being able to classify people to decide what to pay for, what to not pay for, what tests to get. So like so many things, it sounds like a lot of it also comes down to money. I'm surprise, 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 surprise.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so if BMI isn't the gold standard, it's not ideally what we should be using as a screening tool, definitely not the only screening tool. What are some more accurate and comprehensive ways that we can use to assess someone's health?
Yeah. So I think when we're looking at someone's overall health, I think we need to move completely beyond body measurements. I think things like body size and body shape affect health in such different ways for each person. So instead, I really like to first zoom way out and consider the big picture stuff, right? Social determinants of health. This includes things like someone's financial stability,
Mhm.
their access to education, quality healthcare, the environment they live in. Do they have access to healthy food, safe places to be active, transportation, their social support circles, any experience they've had with discrimination? um, these factors have a huge impact on someone's health. And then we can zoom in a little bit and look at direct health behaviors, right? Which are often, not always, more in an individual's control. And that might be getting enough sleep,
Mm.
getting a lot of different kinds of foods and enough food, having regular physical movement that feels good, healthy skin and hair, good digestion, oral health, bone density, regular periods for people who menstruate, and stress management, right? And then even more zoomed in, we have lab work, right? Cholesterol, blood sugar, inflammatory markers. These can all give us a lot of information as well. But I think, again, kind of just from the health at every size perspective, we're really kind of taking the size out of the question and putting in the health and looking at how can we measure that? How can we see that in an individual and then possibly work towards something more healthful?
Yeah, and I can already see why BMI is used as a tool because all of those things you mentioned just seem so big, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so big. And I think it's easier to just go, oh, that's the problem,
Right.
rather than go, oh, we might need to make cities more walkable. We might need to, adjust policies to make healthcare access easier. We might need to have safer schools and neighborhoods, and it's a lot easier just to point at it's the weight than
Hmm.
um,
Hmm.
to create these big systemic changes that affect every part of our health. And when you said sleep, I was like, oh God, I know. I know.
Don't we all? Oh, yeah.
But you touched a little bit on some of the like some of our metabolic biomarkers, so like blood sugar,
Hmm.
cholesterol, blood pressure. How important are these to consider in addition to or instead of BMI?
I think they are extremely important. I mean, I think that we really, again, kind of to repeat our theme here, you can't tell by looking at someone whether or not they're healthy, much to the, contradiction of things we hear and see, whether it's in social media or from some of our own physicians, right? So I'd say first step, right, is looking at some of those biomarkers, especially if they have a family history, which is a quick screening, right, that we can do when we meet a patient for the first time. What's going on in the family history if we have access to that, and then looking at those specific things that they might be at risk for and saying, hey, this is what your body's telling us. Your body is sending us a little message here with these labs or this blood pressure or what have you, that it's not in the happiest place that it could be. And then we can start the conversation about what do we do about it?
Ugh, I love that. And when we think about, like, I know what drew me to being a dietitian, it was those kind of numbers. It was blood sugar, it was cholesterol, it was seeing those challenges in the family, more than size. More
Yes,
than that.
yes.
We want to live long, happy lives. Yes. If I'm thinking back, so when I was in school to become a dietitian, I had the honor and pleasure of having Dr. Dan Binnerdot as my professor for several of my nutrition courses. And he just happened to be the nutritionist for the USA Olympic team for cross country. And so he had
Wow.
access to all the coolest technology. And at the time, and DEXA was the coolest technology, and they had one on campus, and we got to go in it. He was like, "You want to go in it?" Like, oh my gosh, we have no access to do. And now there's like DEXA scanners all over. You can just go to a place and pay $100 for a DEXA scanner. There's in-body scans that are happening at gyms. What are we thinking? What do you think the role is of these emerging technologies that are more and more available to the public in helping people decide and learn more about their body composition?
Yeah, I mean, I think like you said, it's like there's this mystique around like knowing what's going on inside of our body. I mean, even whether it's for our clients or patients or ourselves, like there's something interesting about seeing like what is my, blood sugar or my, that's why people are buying blood sugar, continuous glucose monitors that don't even have diabetes. It's like this cool mystery that we get to see inside our bodies. And I think that like those body composition tools are kind of similar. It's like cool, interesting, and I shouldn't say it's cool for everyone. Some people it might be very painful and stigmatizing and hard to get those numbers. But I think in general, there's much more important and direct measures of health and health risk even than body composition, right? Because we're still, if we're looking at body composition to say, oh, well, your BMI says this, but your body composition says this, there's not that many cases, I wouldn't think, where we'd be like, oh, we're just going to totally change our plan now that we know that your body composition is this. It's not going to and for most people be like drastically different than maybe what their BMI is saying. So I think it's just still kind of something that's more, I would really push it to the side and then get right into, let's look at these health assessment tools. Let's look at family history. Let's cut out the middleman, not use body size, body weight, BMI, or body composition as like this proxy for health.
Yes, and you're so right. There's nothing that's going to show up usually on these scans that would really change a care plan because we're really looking at all these other health markers, not just your body composition. Because once again, body composition does not determine health. So you mentioned those things like sleep and mental well-being and stress. Uh, do those tend to be really good, like micro level things that you can just assess within yourself in any given day of like, oh, this is how my overall health status is, or how can we use those things?
So, I mean, I think the great thing about these types of tools or these like ways of thinking about health is that they're mostly free, right? They're things that are hard to come by maybe in healthcare, like time and like the ability to truly listen to people, but we can really, yeah, take these factors like, hey, how have you been sleeping? Where's your stress level at on a scale of 1 to 10? Are you able to get enough food? Are you eating 3 times a day, right? These are simple, but also can really steer our focus, right? Like this person is crushing life with their healthy lifestyle right now. Like we don't need to go in and see, oh, look at their BMI. I'm gonna jump right in and start talking about, low cal or low carb diet. That's where that weight stigma and that healthcare avoidance really start to come in because the assumptions that are made rather than the questions being asked is what's driving the recommendations that people are receiving, especially when they live in a larger body.
Absolutely. I'm thinking of so many patients. I have one who's just an amazing rock star, and when they're feeling stressed, they go work out, and you know, it's a daily habit for them. They're working out 5, 6 times a week because they love it, because they love to move their body, they love to get stronger, and their BMI says that they're obese.
Yeah.
Um,
Yep.
when they are eating beautiful meals, I mean, I would make a meal that's like presentationally, like Instagram worthy, nutritious, filling, water, like the whole thing, meditation. Like this person is hitting it out of the park. I'm learning from them. Like I know to work out in their honor. Um, so, but
Nice.
their BMI is completely different than all the markers of their life. So that really
Yep.
makes a lot of sense. Which leads me to some of those myths and misconceptions, and I think you've hit on a lot of them, but I would love if you have any examples of people with that normal BMI that, 18 to 24.9, but who might have those underlying health issues still.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, one of my favorite studies, I'll have to throw it in the show notes because I don't have it off the top of my head, the authors, but it's essentially a study that looks at 5 lifestyle choices. I sometimes hesitate to use the word choices because that's a relative term for some people, depending on their situation.
Yeah.
But it says kind of basically BMI or, you know, fill in any weight related marker is essentially erased when people are doing these 5 health habits.
Ooh.
So you can think about it the other way, is your question, right? If someone has a quote unquote normal or healthy quote unquote BMI, but they aren't doing any of these 5 habits, they are going to be at a much higher risk from a health standpoint for any conditions. And just kind of calling out here, any health condition that's usually associated with a higher body weight is also a health condition that thin people can get.
Mm.
There is no health condition, right? Other than if, I know some in the medical system, right, consider obesity a health condition, right? Aside from that, there is nothing that a thin person would not also be at risk for if they're kind of having that lifestyle or those lifestyle factors that could potentially lead to it. So there's really no condition I can think of that people with normal BMIs are exempt from.
That's amazing. So give me those top 5. What are our top 5?
Oh yeah, I just totally left on a cliffhanger. Not smoking, nicotine products. Um, Moderating alcohol, I believe it was like one drink or less. I have to look at the study exactly. Eating high amount, I believe it's 5 servings of fruits and vegetables every day. Getting an hour or somewhere around those, might be like 150 minutes a week of physical activity. Poof, that fifth one is going to escape me. I do not know it off the top of my head, but I can get back to you on that.
That is okay. Just with those 4. So I'm like, all right, check, not smoking, moderating alcohol, high amounts of fruits and veggies. I'm doing it. 100 physical activity. I want to do it. I do it sometimes. So, all right. So far I have, 3 out of the 4 consistently, but I bet by the end of this week, I can get that 150 up. I can do it.
You can.
Yeah.
I believe in you.
Oh, thank you. So on the other side of it, are there instances where a higher BMI might not cause so much of a concern, even if, like, let's say it's a BMI of 40? Should we automatically, as healthcare providers, be concerned about poor health?
My short answer is no. But really, like you said, it works in both directions. So body size does not directly dictate an individual's health status. And that could be a whole podcast, right? How do we define health? That is huge, I think. And I think a lot of the way that we define health is from a pretty ableist lens sometimes, right? Like being able to be physically active, being able to not have your body get in the way of things that you want to be able to do in your life. If we're defining health in that way, then I would posit that someone with a larger body living in a world that is not made always for larger bodies is going to have some barriers to living that life. Whether or not we say that is a direct impact on their health is arguable. But as a dietitian, I'm consistently advocating for putting BMI and weight aside and looking at those factors, all those things we just talked about. And, quality of life, right? Keeping in mind, one person's definition of health and their ability to meet these criteria that we've just listed out can really vary so much from person to person.
Oh, that makes so much sense. And I'm thinking back to the mental health aspect of this and to the stigma that comes along with a higher BMI, or with seeing that number, getting that number. Your physician tells you have a 32, a 34. Like, what does that mean? And what's next? I'd love to talk a little bit about the psychological impact of BMI, of weight stigma, of some of the dieting practices that go along with it. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So, um, because of everything we've just talked about, right? Because BMI is such a quick, easy proxy for health, we've developed a really real and harmful stigma around larger bodies. And so this fact, has been solidified, I would say, by a lot of research, showing that, the higher amount of weight stigma and other types of stigma, right? People don't just hold one identity of larger body sizes, can apply to racial groups or LGBTQ orientation. A lot of these things can compound and make the world a harder place to live in. And that stigma, right, that stress alone can be a factor for poor health, but it also can lead to behaviors that lead to poorer health. So a higher experience of weight stigma is often going to lead to healthcare avoidance, right? I don't want to walk into another doctor's office and be told to lose weight without even, especially when my presenting concern has nothing to do with that, right?
Yeah.
You hear those stories all the time, and people, quite frankly, have died because they were either not correctly treated or they were withheld either tests or procedures that they should have had access to because of their body size. So yeah, I mean, that's a whole thing of the way that weight stigma impacts people and how it impacts the way that practitioners practice, and thus, has a huge impact on someone's health and morbidity and mortality, completely independent of whether or not their body size has a direct impact on their health.
So one thing that I hear often is I'm trying to lose weight so that I can be around for my kids. I can be around for my grandkids. There's a big association between BMI and mortality. And we even call a BMI over 40 morbid obesity. So you'll die from this
Right.
obesity. Um, so what are the studies really showing us around BMI and mortality risk?
Yeah, I mean, so I feel like it's important to kind of convey right off the bat that that relationship between BMI and mortality risk, it's complex. It's not straightforward like it's often portrayed. So we have that population level data that sometimes shows a correlation between higher BMI, like you said, especially at the higher ends of the high end, right, where we start to label it as morbid, which I think is extremely stigmatizing and scary. Um, but really, this doesn't necessarily translate to individual risk in every case, right? There's growing evidence that's challenging this narrative. And of course, like as science-minded people, we're familiar with that adage that correlation does not equal causation, right? But I think this is a nuance that sometimes needs to be brought out, right? Is to say that just because we see a correlation between high BMI and mortality, right? There's so many third variables. I think that's what we were kind of just getting at, right? That correlation can be kind of impacted upon by weight stigma, poorer healthcare delivery, healthcare avoidance due to predicted weight stigma, social stigma, so many things. And then in terms of studies, yeah, I think there are some that show that, a BMI being a sole predictor of mortality is not extremely accurate or useful. Again, population level, yes, individual level, not always.
And I think that's so important to remember when we're looking at anything that's a percentage, that's a risk. We talk a lot in our world of healthcare about risk, but I've never seen
Right.
100% risk. Even for some of the worst things out there, even for things like smoking, there's not 100% chance that you're going to get lung cancer. Not 100% chance that you'll have COPD. Like there's not 100%.
Yes.
And so we always want to remember that we're all our own little
Yes.
ecosystems, and and everything about us is individual. And so I think we need to. What I'm getting from this is we need to remember that individuality even when dealing with public health
Yeah.
statistics. Which leads to my next question of what are we supposed to do, Ashleigh? So as healthcare providers, like how do we use BMI in practice responsibly?
Yeah. Well, my, my approach, what I would advocate for would be first and foremost, uh, acknowledge weight stigma exists. Acknowledge or ask, get curious about this person that's standing in front of you, this individual, like you said, their experience of living in a larger body, right? If we just pretend like BMI doesn't exist and, body size should have no, direct impact on health and we should just look at individual factors, we don't want to erase lived experience that people have. And when someone's meeting you for the first time, they don't know that you're a health at every size care provider most of the time, right? They're just coming in expecting to be told most likely what they've been told 10 times before. So I think just acknowledging, hey, I want to hear about your experience in healthcare so far. What are you worried that I might say? What fears did you come in here with today? Um, your BMI is a very small slice of the whole picture that we're going to look at together. And I can tell you with utmost certainty that nothing that I'm going to tell you or work with you on is going to be in service of lowering your BMI as our primary indicator of your health. That's where I would start.
That's so beautiful. Like, especially like, what fears, like, were you worried about that, I
Yes.
would say? Uh, because when you do ask that question, you really get an honest answer that can start a beautiful dialogue and relationship that truly serves the health of the person in front of you and sees them as a person, which is so needed in our medical
Yeah.
system now. So that's advice for our healthcare providers. So all you healthcare providers do exactly what Ashleigh said. She is 100% right. But for individuals, this is such a part of our
Yeah.
culture. BMI is just like a cultural entity. So how can we shift our focus to more holistic approaches to measure health than just focusing on that BMI number without just like throwing it out
Yeah.
completely?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, firstly, it's normal that you would be fixated on your BMI, right? If you are an individual living in the world that has been in the US healthcare system, it's normal that you are worried about your BMI potentially if you've been told to worry about it. So, I mean, from BMI report cards in schools, I know some schools are still doing that to like consistent emphasis on BMI at the doctor's office. It's really not easy to like unlearn or even challenge the idea that like your BMI is your health measure, right? Or even your worthiness or your goodness as a person, right? But like learning about health at every size and surrounding yourself with medical providers and even like your social media diet, so to speak, um, with people who have that approach of body size is not you, right? Your body is what allows you
Yeah.
to be in the world, and let's work on taking care of that body so that you can do all the things that you care about and shifting that conversation to overall health rather than just weight.
I love it. And for our last question, I'm going to ask you the question that every dietitian gets at every dinner party we go to. Anytime anyone ever hears that you're a dietitian, they want to know, how can they be healthier? Uh, but some realistic, like actionable steps that people can take to improve their health, regardless of their BMI, even if they don't know, what their blood sugar is today or their blood pressure exactly, like some really general tips that almost anyone can
Love it.
do.
Yeah. So honestly, I feel like I would be remiss if I did not say that we are not de-emphasizing BMI and body weight and body size just to be nice, right? This is not just so that we don't hurt people's feelings. This is an evidence-based approach that is a harm reduction approach, right? We're reducing harm by reducing stigma and opening up the dialogue about what people can actually do to improve their health. And research shows that we can do that independently of any changes in body weight or BMI. So I would certainly love to throw cardiorespiratory fitness or physical, ability on the table. Absolutely. So being physically fit in whatever way that your body allows you to be significantly reduces your mortality risks, improves your overall health. That's mental, physical, regardless of BMI. And it's, important. I think physical activity is kind of my favorite one, I guess, to talk about. So I always like to say it is absolutely possible, and it may look way different than what you see out there in the world for people with low mobility or chronic pain, and it can significantly enhance their quality of life. So we have to kind of think about those gentle, low impact, adaptable approaches. That might be water exercise, that might be chair exercise, that might be resistance bands, or it might be mind body practices, right? That do very little physical movement, but still get at that kind of lowering of blood pressure, lowering of stress. So that's one. And then nutrient dense eating patterns. So there's always going to be a hot diet. I feel like protein is the hot girl right now. But
Yeah, everyone.
variety, I like to talk about variety, and reducing shame and blame from someone's diet is actually a harm reduction measure that can improve their health. Of course, we want to emphasize whole, unprocessed foods, right? Without targeting weight loss. Basing our diet on plants, right, has been shown time and time again throughout the eons to improve overall health. So Mediterranean diet would be an example, or the DASH diet. Those are kind of the darlings of the dietetics world of when it comes to, good nutrient dense eating. And then, yeah, we had already talked about it, getting good sleep. Sleep is a cornerstone of health. If you can prioritize sleep, even above and beyond getting up for that workout in the morning. Like, it is okay to make sure you protect those 8 hours or whatever you've kind of come to understand that your body needs. Lastly, I was going to say the last one being stress management. So I think, sometimes this comes last. People are like, I got to change my diet, I got to work out, I got to sleep enough, and stress kind of comes last. I feel like it should come first. If we can manage our stress, all the things we just talked about are going to be so much more realistic, sustainable, meaningful. And so, yeah, that's kind of the key takeaways. Those health promoting behaviors, they offer like significant measurable benefits for everyone, regardless of their body size.
And you're so right to be obsessed with exercise, because the last thing you mentioned, stress, the first thing you mentioned, exercise, helps out so much
Love
with
it.
that.
So true.
Such an important piece of it. And I think that's what's so hard for so many people, myself included, is when life is really stressful and is really hard, it feels like the last thing you want to do is move your body, when it's one of the most immediate things you can do to give your body just that hit of joy. And so this whole conversation has been a good reminder. Basically, I need to go take a walk.
I love it.
Gax. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to research this, to talk with us about this. I knew this is a subject that can be so stressful, can cause real pain to people, and also hopefully after this conversation provide some joy and relief to people. And I just thank you so much for your time.
Well, thank you for having me on, Alicia. This was a really good conversation. And I do also hope that people can kind of walk away a little bit lighter, able to take this one thing off of their shoulders.
If you're a big old science nerd and want to dig deeper into the information we discussed today, all the references and resources are linked in the show notes for this episode. Just tap the link in your podcast app. To make sure you never missed a single pea-sized nugget of wisdom, be sure to like and subscribe wherever you're listening right now. And if you enjoyed what you heard, we'd absolutely love for you to leave us a comment or review. It really helps new listeners find us. Want to keep the conversation going? You can find the Pea Podcast every single day on social media. Connect with us on Instagram, Facebook, and Threads by searching for Pea Pod Nutrition. And if you'd like to follow my personal journey and insights, you can find me, Alicia Simpson, as the ADHD nutritionist on TikTok, Instagram, and Threads. If you have a headline you would like us to dive into and feature on the Pea Podcast, email us at podcast@peapodnutrition.org. That's podcast@peapodnutrition.org. Thank you so much for joining me today. Until the next time, stay curious, stay critical, and keep nourishing your body and mind. See you soon.